Hello and welcome back to Trying Times. Or if you're listening for the very first time ever, then welcome to Trying Times. My name's Carmen, I'm your host, and whether you're new here or not, we're basically best friends. So we just talk about a lot of stuff together. Like sometimes we might talk about some things that are cringy, sometimes we might talk about things that are a little sad or a little more serious. Sometimes we talk about things that are just straight up embarrassing and funny. I will say this episode is going to be a little bit more serious as opposed to other subject matter that I get into with other episodes and other topics I've focused on before. So, yeah, this episode is going to be about something a little bit more serious, and it's basically going to talk a lot about relationships with food. I do want to give a precursor right as we get into it, just because this could be something that's a little triggering to some people, or maybe very triggering to some people. I will be honest, this is even difficult to talk about, but I think it's very important to talk about and bring some light to. So, although I have no notes specifically or particular thoughts in mind as I'm recording this right now, I do just want to say that there may or may not be brief mention of different eating disorders or disorders revolving around potential relationships with food for different people. So, yeah, if that is something that you find very, very hard to listen to or you struggle to listen to, please feel free to click off and maybe onto another episode or maybe onto something else altogether. I won't hate you for that. I totally understand. And I thank you for joining and sharing your time with me regardless. So, yeah. Moving along with the episode. I think this topic is one that I have always paid a little bit of attention to, probably from the young age of like 12 and 13. And I think when you're someone that just pays a lot of attention to media, it's easy to focus on it and it's kind of hard to escape, if anything. So over time, I found myself doing some research on this and really wanted to talk about this in an episode at some point in the future. I figured, why not now? So we'll start off with an interesting fact that I actually read about this. This is a little bit more of a therapist or clinical approach to this as well, but I read an online entry that was written by a clinician who actually has a specialty in food relationships and helping her clients understand this within their own lives as well. So basically, the way that this clinician breaks it down is she turns this into a bit of a sequence, if you will. So, the very first aspect of this would be understanding how our relationship with food helps to shape us, nourish us, heal us, and also potentially break us. In this, she talks about how food can be helpful in signifying major events, for instance. With any celebration, we tend to have cake, and so forth. At the same time, this can also be sensory. We all like different textures, which is a big thing. And that leads sort of into the next sequence, if you will, which is that our choices in food can also lead to shaping our identities. In a nutshell, with this one, she gets into how there are so many choices, and sometimes that can be over inundating, but sometimes it's just enough. Depends on the person. And with this, she specifies further how there can sometimes be judgment behind certain food or food choices, which can sometimes turn our critical side of our brains on and maybe affect our approach or affect our perspective on that when we're making that choice or that decision with food. And then she even goes ahead and ties this into the relationship between food and our financial status, which is the two heavily impact one another, I believe. Well, one more than the other, maybe. I believe obviously affordability is a massive thing in this sector. So that's a really big aspect that she brings up. And she even brings up how our choices in food can be very symbolic of our value systems, or even a sign of our value systems, which then furthermore leads into the third and final sequence. So, the third and final sequence or category that she brings to the forefront is this title of being the rebellion. And basically, what this is it looks into a current relationship with food versus the relationship we want to have. Now, this may not be the case for everybody, but I do think if you are somebody that struggles with eating, it's something that can be very relevant. And in this section, she brings up some really good questions and statements to be able to learn more about the relationship you might currently have and what you're looking to form. So basically, taking something that might feel difficult, daunting, overwhelming, overstimulating, if you will, and turning it into something that feels rewarding or feels positive or feels more in your control and more like a choice. So I find it really interesting. And I fell into a little bit of a rabbit hole with reading this whole online entry from a clinic called the Skylark Counseling Clinic. I found it really interesting to read more about this because I think it's something that a lot of people may or may not struggle with. And I just find it interesting that somebody is very specifically targeting and specializing in this because I think it can help a lot of people. So, some of the questions that she actually gets into here, and I'll share just a couple. The first, for instance, is what identifiers do you want to connect when it comes to the benefits of food? So, an example she wrote is I do want to be known for being vegan, or I do want to be known for being generous with food. Another question, what judgments do you want to distance yourself from? An example being, I order takeout too much, I waste money on food, and so forth. And then out of the total 5 questions she has here, I'll share one more. How can you support those around you with food shame by not saying something? So, for example, by not asking into the no thank you, by not commenting on a bag of chips, by not taking a second glance. So, a lot of these sort of prompts that she's given are very, very self reflective, but also involve a lot of self awareness, I find. And I really like the last prompt and the example that she offered because I think without realizing it, a lot of people, maybe even myself included, don't realize how much our mannerisms can impact someone else in an instance who may be struggling, or even ourselves. Like that inner critic can be absolutely brutal and it can make anything and everything difficult, including choices with food or even just ingesting and feeding your body with food. It can be really, really hard. I think, like I said, for so many people, possibly when they're younger, or when they're older, it's very possible to develop an a maybe unhealthy or unstable relationship of sorts with food. And I will be fully transparent and honest when I say this because I've been there and it can really vary for everyone, myself included, whether it's eating too much or not eating enough. I think it is actually quite common and I wanted to look a little deeper into this online and see what I could find. And I actually found a statistic within Canada that said an estimate of 2.7 million people are affected by an eating disorder of some kind. And this number was just in 2024 alone, which is very telling, I think. Out of this number, roughly 1.4 million of these people are within the youth demographic. And kind of like I mentioned before at the very beginning of this episode, there are a number of factors here, right? Something for me that I paid a lot of attention to growing up and even still is media, whether that's watching a movie, watching a show, listening to music, watching a music video, whatever it may be, even looking through a magazine or scrolling through social media. There are so many different takes on this. But as we know, this maybe, at least when we were a lot younger, early 2000s specifically, wasn't always the most representative of the real world and a lot of diversity. Really, I will say that as I've gotten older, I have found that as I've traveled and gotten to meet more people, I have seen so much more and have found the ability to have comfort within my own skin, which is truly, truly an unmatched feeling and it's amazing. But it does really make me reflect on the times that I was younger. I mean, Disney in itself was, sort of by the book or creating a standard of what a lot of people wanted to look like, maybe, if that's what you're into, or if you were into looking at magazines and keeping up with the fashion world, that's very telling as well and functions in a different way. Same thing with if you pay attention to certain music, there might be certain connotations of beauty that come with that. And that can be hard. And a lot of these aspects don't always entirely affect your relationship with food, but there's a chance that there is a little bit of that is affecting or inspiring your relationship with food. And that's something that I learned as I grew up very, very quickly as well. But that doesn't mean it's just like solved. And it isn't to say, even, saying as I've traveled and met people, it feels great. Like I'm more comfortable in my own skin. This isn't to say that that solved everything because it didn't. And the journey of healing within this kind of a space is truly much more extensive than taking a trip or reading a few resources. But I definitely think that having open conversations in a safe space, having support. Of course, a support system is huge, and learning about healthier alternatives can really help in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a little or a lot. I think all of these components are so important in really building that self-awareness, but also supporting yourself and feeling supported in being able to change this relationship or transform this relationship, even in the slightest, to become a little more positive. Since this subject is a little heavier, I didn't want to pull in too many experiences externally because I know it's not easy to share about. This is normally the part of an episode where I share either some responses that I got from some friends or family, or I go onto Reddit and I share about some things here and there that I found about other people's experiences. But again, because this is very, very heavy and very personal, I feel like I would just take a little bit of a different approach. So instead of using those experiences or using a public, forum, I decided to actually resort to being a little more thoughtful towards a public figure as an example of sharing their story and continuously trying to bring awareness to both healing and building a healthy relationship with food. So, the first person that comes to mind, Demi Lovato. I know I brought up Disney earlier in an episode, and this is definitely a topic that Demi has not strayed from sharing about, which I genuinely appreciate and I respect heavily. She has, on numerous accounts, worked across a handful of campaigns to bring awareness to well being and to her own past experiences. And this, in no way, shape, or form, skims over her own trauma or very life altering events. Because if you know anything about her, there's so much more to always learn. And it's truly a miracle that she's still here. But I absolutely adore that she is confident in sharing everything about her story. So she in no way ever skims over sharing about her own life, whether that be traumas, whether that be struggles, or life altering events. She's someone who very openly will share what feels potentially like a bit of a loss alongside wins and is very optimistic, even in the scariest of circumstances, really. And I genuinely adore that. She's always been very, very open to sharing, regardless of criticism or judgment. And I think this has been really eye opening to see and hear and almost even like learn from in a way, because I just feel like she's someone I watched at a very, very young age. And seeing her, obviously, for the first time in Camp Rock and then go on to have her own shows on Disney was. It was eye opening and it was amazing. I was like, oh my God, who is this new? At that point in time, Disney in itself was very iconic in the sense of you had people like Selena Gomez, Miley Cyrus, and the list just goes on and on. There were a lot of very, very influential names at that point in time on Disney, but it was like the time to be on Disney. And it was kind of like this, major content house in a sense where there were these icons that I almost kind of look at them as like influencers before influencers in a sense. Like influencers were very much a thing at that point in time, but I felt like so many people were keeping up with them through movies, shows, whatever they were posting on socials, that it felt almost like you were keeping up with influencers. And there was definitely a sense of like parasocial relationships for sure with all of these people, I think, and all of these very talented people. And it was interesting to see her in all of these pieces of media and creating all this music and then touring and then acting and doing all these things back to back to back to back and not even realize, oh my gosh, this person might be struggling with something, or this person might be dealing with something very serious, and not having an idea because she had very much the ideal life of what really any kid or teenager could want at that point in time, which is what makes me respect her being so honest and coming forward with all of her experiences all that much more, because that is not an easy thing to do. I think to live through everything once and block it out is already scary enough, but to live through everything and then be able to share that openly takes an immense amount of strength. And she has very openly shared about her relationships in the past with food and also with other substances and how that has affected her over time, and how a lot of that started again at a very, very young age when she was very much in the limelight of anything and everything Disney, it felt. So I always look to her as someone who I find very, very inspirational because she's never strayed from openly sharing about that or being her true self. And I think even though it's intimidating and there's a lot of, you know, kickback or what have you, she has never really strayed from talking about it, which is truly commendable. So that's been really eye opening for me to see and hear. Again, she is someone that I've probably been watching since I was like, I don't even know, 12 or 11 years old. And I am now 28 years old. So that's pretty crazy. I feel like I grew up watching her in a sense. And one of the most remarkable things I can say is that on top of working through all of this and then going forward to work on different campaigns to bring further awareness, she's also worked on her own documentaries to bring further light to this kind of subject matter. And how insane in the most beautiful way is that? It's truly something special. I want to say also she I think recently worked on a documentary called Child Star, I believe. I hope I'm remembering the name correctly. This is actually through Disney and Hulu. I recently watched that. She did direct it or co-direct it and was very, very much in creative control of this. And I found it very telling because I've watched all of her documentaries she's done to this point. But in this one, I feel like she was able to really articulate her experience as a child in the spotlight quite well. And it was very, very tough at times to watch because it also featured many other celebrities who also have been on the same pipeline of being a child star and growing up in the limelight in Hollywood. So I would 100% recommend that if you're looking for something to watch. It is truly eye opening. And yeah, I find that really admirable. And to finish all that, I will say, still to this day, she speaks up and doesn't hold back on sharing about her experience. And I find that truly, truly incredible because a lot of people will be in spaces like this and they'll never be able to share about it, or maybe can't build up the courage to share about it because it's a very scary thing to do. So she's doing something that's very hard for a lot of people and is taking ownership in that. And I find that so brave. So, yeah, I think seeing people like her in the spotlight definitely bringing more awareness to difficulty around eating or body image issues and body dysmorphia and so forth is actually quite helpful to many people because it's somebody out there who is creating a conversation around something that can be uncomfortable and it can be scary. But the only way to make it a little bit less scary and more approachable is to have conversations, which is why I wanted to do this. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening to me ramble. I really appreciate you. This topic is very heavy, and if you chose to listen to the whole thing and stuck through, I really appreciate you. If you listened to the intro and you clicked off, I still appreciate you. And yeah, that's it. If you have any thoughts on this episode or anything you'd like to talk about, please feel free to DM me at the Trying Times podcast. I'd love to talk to you as always. And if you have any thoughts or you want to share your thoughts on certain prompts and subjects, please feel free to click on the link in the Instagram bio to be able to get to the Google form and share your thoughts on certain prompts that will be featured in future episodes. So, yeah, that was a mouthful. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or night whenever you're listening to this, and we'll chat again soon, okay? Bye.